So here we are. Welcome to the February monthly community call. I just introduced myself, so I'm not going to repeat myself. I'll just leave it to maybe Augusto, who just joined, to introduce himself, and then you can sort of like pass it on to someone else.
Hi, I'm Augusto, based in Brasília, Brazil, and I'm a long-time user of Frictionless data, and I work with data engineering and open data. And I will pass word to, let's see who's here. Keith.
You're deliberating for a long time there. I'm Keith. I'm a postdoc at NIH, and I work with all kinds of genomics data, and I've been using Frictionless for some time now, at least a few years, and quite enjoy it. With that, I'll pass it to Ricardo.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm keeping my camera off because my connection is a little bit laggy. But yeah, I work at the Digital Public Goods Alliance. I mostly work through open source projects. I have used Frictionless to create some data standards before when I worked in government, but I mostly now focus on pushing open source for in developing countries through this initiative. Yeah, I will pass it on to Mike. No, Mike, you already went or not? Sorry, I'm really
not yet.
Okay, then it will be Mike.
Official recording of my introduction. Yeah, my name is Mike. I'm based in Chicago, in the United States. I work with NORC at UChicago. It's a nonprofit company affiliated with UChicago, and specifically the Center for Translational Data Science at UChicago. And what we're trying to do is use Frictionless to gather multiple different domains of data within the domain of opioid use disorder under the HEAL initiative, which is a big NIH initiative. And so I kind of got introduced to Frictionless by my colleague Phil Shum. He's been in this community, I think, a couple of times, but yeah, we're trying to use it to interoperate and build a data mesh with multiple sources. So Keith was talking about imaging data, et cetera, would be amenable for Frictionless. That's kind of what we're trying to do. Right now, we're focusing on tabular data. So obviously Frictionless is perfect for this use case. I'll pass it to, who hasn't gone? Aditya?
Yeah, Aditya cannot speak because she's listening from a bot, but maybe
okay.
I think we're missing Cesar, Ole, and Sassi.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
can you
we
hear
can.
me? Okay, I'm Cesar Calafrioli. I live from Brazil, and I work at Federal University of Pernambuco. I'm here as a listener because we are starting to develop a project here using Frictionless data and LiveMac to process data sets. It's my first time here. I start listening. Thank you.
Well, welcome. Ole, would you like to go next? And Ethan, I'll just leave you to do the introduction when you start the presentation, of course.
Okay. Sure thing, last but not least. And I would love to say hi to everybody. So I'm a coder activist and member of the Swiss chapter of Open Knowledge. I apologize, I overheard you talking something about public transport and hiking paths. Yeah, the kind of country I live in. The last time I worked with Frictionless data a lot was last year, working on a solution to one of the more acute aspects of the refugee crisis that we have in Europe, which is trying to coordinate people of movements within the country, and love to tell that story at one point. And I also run a lot of hackathons. I'm currently planning a large event next month, which will involve the federal government institutions kind of like a Code for Germany, Code for America type event, where people are looking at the different APIs and trying to figure out interoperability challenges. And definitely agree about the goal of trying to extend frictionless data. I actually, with my colleagues, proposed a spatial data extension, so a spatial data scheme. Just a couple of days ago, I was talking to a colleague who's very active in this here about semantic web, linked data, how the fact that JSON LD is kind of foundational, but we don't really do a lot of talk about things like DCAT within frictionless data space. So yeah, really excited to hear about glaciers. It's in my live stream to go up to a glacier before they're all gone. And yeah, passing on to Ethan.
Actually, maybe before you go, I don't know if Sassi, you want to quickly introduce yourself as well?
Thank you, Sarah. I'm
Sorry,
Sassi. I'm Sassi and I'm from Nepal, and I work as a developer in Open Knowledge Foundation.
Thanks, Sassi. And Ethan, the floor is all yours now.
Okay, thanks, Sarah, for reaching out to me through a GitHub issue thread or something like that. Yeah, so I'm indeed based in Switzerland as well. Hence all the trains and mountains. No, so I'm at the University of Zurich, the Department of Geography, and my background is, sort of in computer science and physics and math, and nowadays a lot of spatial data in my life, and I'm currently a postdoc at the World Glacier Monitoring Service, which is this very ancient scientific institution. They've been coordinating international glacier monitoring since 1894. And I was basically brought in to modernize some of the ways that the data is managed and verified and published. And yeah, I have some slides and some demoing, so I guess I'll share my screen and we'll see if I can handle that. So let's see if I can do this. Oh dear. Too many windows. Sorry. Let's try that again. I'll just share my entire screen. Seems to be more reliable. Okay. What can you see at the moment?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Do you still see?
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. So yeah, just to give you a little bit of a sense of what we do, which will give you a sense of our challenge. So we're responsible for. So we're not. Yeah, the World Glacier Monitoring Service is a little bit interesting as a data repository in that we actually maintain a single, very important, long-running data set that we curate from submissions that we receive from all of our national correspondents around the world and other scientists who are themselves going out to glaciers, making measurements, often in the old school ways. So these are really important on the ground measurements of glacier mass change. So basically, like you stick a rod into the glacier and you go back regularly and you measure at that location by measuring the amount of the stick that's sticking out of the ice, how much ice has melted, or maybe how much snow has fallen. And you basically look at the surface change. And these are measurements that are very important for calibrating much larger scale measurements that we do from space with satellites, which are obviously you can get global coverage, which is what this map is showing. But there's bigger uncertainties. And you're not measuring the same thing. So when you go in person and you measure the mass change, like you can actually estimate, how much was ice, how much was snow, what was the density. So you're really like estimating the amount of water removed from the glacier, which you can't really do so much from this satellite measurements. Anyway, and so we have these are observations that are coming in from many, many places. And they result in these time series of glacier length change, glacier mass balance, that's what I was describing, and also glacier thickness change measured from space. And I took on, so by far the biggest challenge that we have, I think, is that we have people, the data is not generated by machines because these are not really automated instruments. These are, think of hundreds of different people who are writing up their numbers and sending them to us every year. And so a lot of my work has been coming up with a way to manage that and to catch errors and to make it easier for our contributors, but also make it easier for us to review their submissions. And so that's, I adopted the frictionless tabular data package approach and generally been trying to get as much of the logic of the organization and the data management into centralized metadata. And so that's, for example, if you have the data package descriptor and maybe some documentation templates, something like maybe Jinja you're familiar with, you can generate automatically, say, a spreadsheet template that would help someone do data entry. And so we have a data package that describes the submission format. We have another one, of course, for the sort of output format. And then software that takes care of all the logic of keeping these pieces together. But the idea is that as much of our data workflow stems from this sort of central metadata, generates instructions for submitters, generates documentation for data users, all from the same place. Now, when it comes to actually validating submissions, validating our data, I've, in this case, gone a bit further, kind of my own way a little bit in terms of validation. And that's another project that maybe at some point I'll talk about, a bit of a different approach for data validation, where it scales to much longer pipelines. So just to give you an idea here, we're running the data submissions through, I think it's at this point over 700 checks. These are just a lot of cross-tabular validation, a lot of cross sort of across rows, a lot of logical inference. Well, like if this is null, then really that shouldn't be null unless it's other, like things like that. And so I found that quite difficult in the end to pull off and to have it be fast with Frictionless. So this is where I'm kind of doing a little bit my own thing. And the spreadsheets sort of play a central role, whether I like Excel or not, because so many people who send data to us, or that's what they're comfortable using. So Excel is king in many worlds, and also some of the people in the World Glacier Mining Service, that's what they're most comfortable using. And so I also, besides the templates, actually have this whole system where, based on the validation pipeline, there's an Excel file that gets generated with sort of built-in markup that then a human reviewer can modify kind of in situ, and then it gets reloaded and rerun through the pipeline, and they basically iterate. And it's frankly a pretty, there's some care one has to make when passing the data through a spreadsheet, especially Excel, but in the end, it's a pretty efficient way to work for folks who are not, and we don't have to invent a whole new interface. Just actually today, I started to pull out this functionality for the template generation into its own package, which I just posted to GitHub, and I named it tablecloth, which is cute. And you can tell me what you think. But it's basically structured now so that there's kind of a general class, which is just keeping track of like, well, where is a table in your spreadsheet? You know, and what sheet is it? If you have, for a dropdown, maybe you have a list of values in a sheet somewhere. You know, you basically register the tabular layout in the spreadsheet, and then you can have it generate, kind of tell you where things are in spreadsheet notation, and also formulas for different types of validation. So this is kind of the core. And then basically, then you can, there's a version for Excel. I'm gonna have to rewrite the one for the Google Sheets support. And here is where I'm a bit of a loss, is there's so many different possible ways of doing this that it's hard to come up with all the possible arguments to a function to control the behavior. But in short, and I'll switch to actually showing what this looks like. This is where the support for different features that you'd be familiar with from the frictionless specs are. So Excel and Google Sheets, although I have to rewrite that into the tablecloth version. I've made only so far through integer, number, string, and Boolean fields, but all constraints, and at least regular expressions, at least in Google Sheets. Excel doesn't support it. And then also foreign keys, at least one-to-one foreign keys. There's just a limit to what you can do in spreadsheets and not get in the weeds. So maybe I should now show you, since we promised a demo, what this looks like. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
So here's imagine two tables. So main and secondary down here, and there is hidden from view, there is a third sheet that has for drop downs. And ID is required. So we have the columns and some simple, it could be more complicated, but so that's pulled from, in this case, is the field description being used as comments, but that's can be modified. And now ID is required actually. And so as soon as there's a value in the row, it'll tell you that in fact it's invalid in red until you fill it with a value. Now it also has to be unique. So now that you have duplicate values, those are also highlighted. Boolean, that gets a little drop down. Yeah, then there's string min and max. I forget what the actual requirements are, but you get the idea. Oh, and the enum. So A, B, or C, excellent. So if we do C, the D would be, it wouldn't even let us do it. And here, this is the drop down from main. So ID, so it's a foreign key. And so it requires values that are currently here. So if we added a 2, then we could add a 2, but 3 wouldn't be allowed. And if I delete the 2, then this is red. Now there's different levels of protection, you could be more annoying and actually have it yell at you immediately. And here is actually listing all of the requirements: integer, not blank, unique, greater equal to 1. So that's another option of turning on these alerts or not. And it gets more complicated, and maybe you start to understand why this is useful. Wait, sorry, here we go. So here's actually one from many different tables. format, where now this is sort of a chain of tables that are related to each other, where, so here, let's say 2020, and those are still showing as not found until they're here. And of course, this is actually still not found because it expects to be here. And anyway, we go back and now they're showing as valid. So that's just how it looks. In the end, it's just a spreadsheet, but with a lot of formulas built in. Yeah, and I guess I can put up, here's my contact info and the link to Tablecloth, and also other code from the WGMS, the World Glacier Mining Service, is on the GitLab page. That's all.
Thanks a lot, Ethan. Maybe we can open it up for questions or comments if anyone has anything.
Yeah, this is really cool, and something we're thinking about in terms of making a graphical user interface. Is there, so when somebody makes a change, I'm thinking, is there a way that is captured in a transformation pipeline so that it can be reproduced? So say somebody has like input data and it's not correct, and then they change it in that spreadsheet. And once they change it to a specific value, then you programmatically make a frictionless pipeline. And then the next time they run it, you can just run it through that pipeline. Like what happens when they change it? Is anything saved, like the history of that?
So I think there's two different things which may have been confusing. I talked about using spreadsheets, one to provide a template for data entry, for manual data entry, and that's what I'm showing.
I see. Okay.
I'm also using outputting and reading from sort of specially formatted spreadsheets for reviewing issues in data submissions. And there we track changes in the sense that we have the original submission, and then we have the submission as we end up. If we had to make the changes ourselves, we have that version, and then of course then it gets pushed to the database, and the database is also tracking versions, but there's no like explicit version control on the granular changes being done in Excel, because we've been happy with just having the submission and then the submission as it was when it went to the database. I'd be curious. I'm very curious to see if the frictionless, what's it called, the desktop application, if that will make all of this not, and I can retire this effort, and I can just tell people just use this, and here's the URL to a data package descriptor, and it will validate your your data entry, because nowhere here am I going for in the submission templates. It's already work enough to try to implement all of the constraints that are built into the table schema, and so I don't anticipate really ever having custom checks. This is so much work to get a spreadsheet to do things. So I'd be happy if this new application, I forget what it's going to be called, does all these things already. And then that'll be, because there's one thing I didn't mention that's quite important and annoying, is that yes, it gives, this is basically a free interface that people are very familiar and they'll have on their computers already to use. for data entry for submissions, but there's a big danger, which is that I've not found a way to prevent copying and pasting. So if you copy and paste by default in Excel and Google Sheets, that includes the formatting, the conditional formatting. It includes the, I think, data validation as well. And so you can quickly wreak havoc on the template if you're not careful. And we had to give people specific instructions to do Shift Control V or whatever. But basically to paste values only if they're copying and pasting. And that's, I would say, the single most serious flaw of this approach. And I don't know of a way around that, of locking, of disabling copying and pasting of data validation. And yeah, so it's not perfect.
That was a great presentation and really cool work. Wonder why, if you're going through the trouble to use Jinja already to create kind of dynamic templates, why not just generate web forms? And that way you'd have a lot more control over the input.
So it would be quite horrible to produce an Excel from a Jinja template. So luckily I'm not doing that to myself. For the web forms, well, because it's a whole lot more work to maintain a custom online tabular interface with all the features that people expect when they're working in spreadsheets. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, of course it's an option, but it's a way more work. And I think, we're not necessarily interested in taking that on as a project that we would maintain into the future. So I think using Excel and meeting our submitters where they're at already was just an expedient way to go about it. And otherwise we have the submitters who are generating things from their own databases, which is obviously preferred, but definitely the minority. There's other, that's much easier to provide an endpoint for self-validation, but to actually create online platform where you can edit multiple tables and copy and paste, I think that's a lot more work than just using these templates, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, no, I mean, that definitely implementing a spreadsheet in the browser would not be fun. I'm pretty sure there are libraries that do that, but still that seems like the goal is not to get a table, it's to get the data. So it seems like you could maybe forego the table and just have well, then again, I guess if you have multiple entries, having form fields and entered each time is not ideal either. I think in my case, I'm just not as nice in general. So if I would enforce people to give me better data or CSV or something like that. But yeah, I think you're more sensible in your approach.
Yeah, I mean, no, I thought about, I thought about, well, can I use basically a JSON schema form generating library? But that's horrible, because these data submissions are often hundreds of rows. It would just take forever. And then, yeah, and certainly, and you could also, of course, you could sort of pivot the data from this tabular relational table approach to a nested object, approach. But most of these people have no idea what I'm talking about, and it would be, yeah, it would be a very, very foreign approach to assembling the data structure for them, and actually kind of tedious, because then it's quite hard. There's a lot of moving around parts and copying and pasting and columns that are all the same, but other columns, yeah. So, but I hear you that it seems a bit strange.
Ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
So thanks a lot for the really cool demo, Ethan. I already replicated the project on my local machine and left you a GitHub issue with a small improvement suggestion. I'm wondering, kind of frictionless data, is that a topic you've already managed to take up with some of your colleagues in the scientific community? And in particular, I'm thinking, surely some of these monitoring sites, the larger ones, they're also building their own tools. Maybe they have like an API or some other database, or they're using, I don't know, Excel or Access or whatever to create these files. And maybe have you, like, for example, have you seen any web tools in the Glacier monitoring community that, for example, frictionless data would be applicable to?
Yeah, good questions. I wrote I assembled this global glacier thickness database, and I actually used, in the paper, I talk about sort of proper data publishing, basically. I mean, the level, yeah, I've had to be a bit of a data evangelist. I guess we all have, because like the bar is so low, frankly. And in science, maybe in geoscience specifically, it's still kind of the Wild West. And it's just, yeah, if people are publishing the data at all, it's in completely bizarre formats, and there's no units, and there's just so much information that's missing, and you're pulling your hair out. And yeah, we've all been there, and I guess I'm preaching to the choir. So I wrote, yeah, in this one paper, in the Earth System Science Data journal, which has become kind of this sort of the data paper journal for Earth system science, so glaciology and otherwise. And so there I talk about frictionless, and I basically say, hey, you could even use Git and like these sort of software, version control, but for data. And that's seems like people have paid some attention to that, and some folks are trying to replicate that for their, sort of smaller data projects that are more typically tabular rather than, rasters, for example. That's not really a good fit. But so yeah, and actually I'm working on another project where I'm sort of helping with another project that are going to use a very similar approach, and they're trying to keep it simpler. And so actually using frictionless repo out of the box, and just not doing my own custom stuff, but like just using it as is. And I think a desire I would have is a little bit more support for remote validation, like untangling, like having for table schema, yes, it seems to be clearly accepted that, oh yeah, like here's a table schema, it's in the cloud, you can validate against that remote schema for table, but I'm not interested in single tables. I'm really interested in data sets, and those are multiple tables that are related to each other. And it kind of annoys me that there's somehow, it's like the single table data set is seen as the standard, even because when we're moving databases around, like it's, yeah, and there are multiple tables, and merging them all together wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. And trying to actually get that to be more standard in the way we publish data. And so I think more support for like, here's a remote multi-table specification, a data package, validate against that, based on these CSV files here or whatever. And I haven't, I have an issue going right now, sort of arguing with, not arguing, but pushing that forward as something that should be available. And so if that doesn't exist, if it did, it'd be very easy for those programmatic submitters to use that. But otherwise, we'll probably build something ourselves. Yeah, just to say like vigms.ch/API/validate or whatever, and then it's not too much work to do that custom.
Other questions or comments? Ethan, you're muted if you're talking to us.
I'll put the link to the paper I mentioned, because it's actually not that, in the chat. See basically my advocacy work.
And
yeah,
I just,
okay.
I first went to Zenodo, and I just searched for open access CSVs about glaciers. And I was just thinking, you know, like that could incentivize some of your colleagues, right? And frictionless data could help them publish in more formats. And everyone, I mean, a lot of people in the research community get platforms like Zenodo or Altmetrics or Archive. All right.
No, and that's in use, but it's more common to find a Zenodo dump of some data with no metadata or a very incomplete metadata. And so that's been the main utility for me, has been saying, hey, you should follow some best practices. The easiest way for you to do that is probably just to adopt this. You know, you have multiple tables, great. There's easy support for that. That in particular, the sort of the multi-table situation, it's a lot more work to implement some metadata in other sort of old school standards, I would say.
Could you maybe tell us how you discovered frictionless data? I didn't really get that from your introduction.
That's a good question. I don't know. It must have been just searching on the internet. I feel like maybe it was through Good Table. I was trying to, yeah, I must have been looking for a way to validate a data against some metadata description of it online. And I maybe found Good Tables or an early version of Frictionless. Yeah, and I've been sort of peripherally involved a little bit ever since. And occasionally some of the random things that spin off from my work at the World Glacier Monitoring Service have been incorporated back into the framework. And you know, maybe, I don't know, maybe eventually this will be as well. Yeah, what is Roll's real full name? That's
Evgeny Karev.
Oh yeah,
Is
okay.
our tech lead.
Yeah, so we've been in touch off and on for a few years. Yeah. I think, yeah, and I had this. Yeah, that's the best answer I can give.
That's great, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ethan. And I kind of wish that Evgeny was here today, but I fortunately couldn't make it because he could tell you a bit more about the application as well. And because you asked the question before. So it's not released yet, as you all know. It's probably going to be released at CSV conference in a couple of months in Buenos Aires. But if you're interested to get an overview of what it's gonna look like, Evgeny actually gave a presentation at FOSDEM a couple of weeks ago, and the recording is now online. I shared it already in the community chat, but I can share it here as well, and it's in the notes. I mean, he would be the one knowing more about this. The idea is that the application would be a sort of like UI that would capture most of like the functionalities that the Python framework already has, and make it more user-friendly for people that have less coding skills. But yeah, I encourage you to go and look at it's not a long talk. I think it's 15-20 minutes. So yeah, that would be a good way to start about that. Do we have other questions or comments or anything that people would like to share?
I'd be curious if there's things that are currently not supported that people would want in the template, spreadsheet template.
I would encourage you to be careful not to try to take on too much like predictive features of things you think people might want to do. It's obviously good to try to think about like what are likely use cases and like what are the most important ones, but I find in working in open source, like you often start with something you want to do or need to do, and you can quickly solve that problem. But then if you want to put it out in the open, you start to ask, okay, well, what might someone else want to use this for? What parameters might they want to do? And then you can spend like 90% of your time supporting features that may or may not ever be used, and like adding all this complexity to your code base. So it's better to maybe, yeah, like keep it small at first. And then if people give you really good reasons or ask for things, then you want to support it, then do it then.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, just my 2 cents.
I posted a link to Excel Wings, which is like a Python, a project to do Python code inside of spreadsheets, and a lot of automation. It's like a Swiss Army knife. It is actually a Swiss company that runs it. They're from Lucerne, but that has nothing to do with it. It kind of goes exactly in the opposite direction of what Keith said. I mean, these guys put everything. It's got everything. You know, any feature you could possibly think of, it's probably already in Excel Wings. So check it out.
Very interesting. I'll look into it.
There's some discussion on the Slack channel about CSV Kit, or I think you mentioned maybe CSV Kit. And I think one of the best features of that is into CSV, just get everything the hell out of Excel into something else.
The one thing I dread, but we're going to need it soon probably. But good luck validating dates in Google, or in actually Google Sheets is fine. In Excel, it's a complete disaster. Never deal with dates in Excel if you can avoid.
That makes me think of so many horror stories.
In genomics data, I all the time will see like gene names that get replaced with dates and all kinds of other atrocities.
Was there more in the agenda, Sarah?
I just have a couple of announcements, but yeah, just wanted to see if like anybody had anything else to share, and then otherwise I can just dig into it.
I mean, I kind of have a question for Ole about, I'm in municipal data land, or government data land, which I sort of alluded to. I'm very deep. So I run a urban foraging nonprofit, and we're
I
very
know.
data.
I know. I just found it.
Yeah, and I guess if we're both in Switzerland, maybe we should be in touch.
There's no excuse. We don't need to fly out to Buenos Aires to meet up. I'll invite you to coffee next week. Okay.
Excellent. Send us a photo, please, in the community chat. Well, my first actually news was about Buenos Aires that Oleg just mentioned. I just wanted to remind everyone here that we are co-organizing a CSV conference, which is a community data conference. Very fun. If you haven't been yet and you can fly to Buenos Aires, I highly recommend you to do so. It's on 19th and 20th of April, and the registration is open. There's a link in the agenda doc that you can find in case you're interested. The other thing that I wanted to say is that at CSVConf, as I mentioned before, Evgeny is officially releasing the Frictionless application, so keep your eyes open for that. Even if you're not flying to Buenos Aires, all the talks will be recorded and available on the CSV conference YouTube channel, so don't fear of missing out here. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is just that the next community call is on March 30th. We don't have yet a presentation scheduled. So if anyone here wants to present anything, there's a form inside the agenda doc that you can use. Otherwise, you can just reach out to me and say, I would like to present something at the next community call. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I don't have any other news, unless you have other questions.
No, just a great presentation, and this is a small meeting as far as the community meetings go, so usually there'll be more people to give you feedback and who'd probably be interested to hear what you have to say, but people might see it on YouTube and get in touch after the fact.
Yeah, totally.
And I guess I should post, maybe after a little bit of cleanup, because I created the repo, the tablecloth rewrite an hour before this call. So it's probably just some testing. And then I'll maybe plop it in to the Slack, for example, and maybe in the discussions, just so folks know it's there.
Yeah, absolutely do. And I'll put the recording also into recap blog. So I'm hoping that also people maybe will come on the community chat and comment on this. Oleg, did you want to say anything?
Just one small thing. We no longer have a tools page on the Frictionless Data website. I was just kind of thinking, what's the product hunt for something like Tablecloth, right? And would it be like this new network, Open OKFN? project page?
So I think we're redoing, like the website is changing a little bit. So I think it could go probably under adoption on the website now, where there are, well, we have pilot collaborations, but also community projects on there, and tool funds and all these things. I think for broader collaborations, like for example, the having frictionless data in other libraries like R or Julia, then we have that under the frictionless universe. But we could maybe argue that we have to, you know, order them in a different way. I mean, we're open also to feedback about that. Yeah, but absolutely, if Ethan, you're interested in having like unofficial like case studies, we're always looking for some. So it's enough to just write a little blog post so that we can have it there. But I'll get in touch and maybe we can discuss this. Okay, if there's anything else, now it's the moment, otherwise I can just let you all go. Ethan, I don't know, I mean, generally there's more people in this call. I don't know if it's carnival or something, but yeah, I'm hoping that maybe you'll get some more feedback in the community chat.
It is Fasnacht this weekend.
Yeah.
Can I ask a beginner question here? So Keith, you brought up the CVS kit. How should I think about CVS kit in terms of other tools available like Pedal and Pandas, etc., for converting CSV? Where does that fit in the world of converters?
So CSV kit is just a command line tool. It's kind of like a command line Swiss Army knife, but made for working with CSV data. And that includes tab delimited files, but also it can get data out of Excel, at least in simple forms, into CSV. So it's basically, if you're comfortable working on the command line and, you know, using pipes to transform things, then it can easily be used to like select columns, filter rows, and do all that kind of stuff. There's another one that we also discussed in the Slack channel, VisiData. That's fantastic. It's just a terminal tabular data viewer, but it also supports things like Feather and Parquet files via Pandas. And I think I've accidentally opened like JSON and other kinds of things with it, and it seems to support those as well now. So, but it can do, again, it's super flexible and is actually quite powerful, even though I barely just scratched the surface in most of the use. But yeah, these are all just like tools for working with tabular data in the command line, basically.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Other curiosities or questions? Okay, I mean, if anything comes to your mind, you can just pop your questions in the community chat anyhow. Thanks again, Ethan, for the great presentation. And thanks all for attending today. I hope to see you all next month. And meanwhile, we'll chat on the community chat on Slack or via Matrix. Thanks all.
Everyone.
Thanks for organizing.
Bye-bye.
To see everyone.
Have a great week.
Bye-bye.